Oh, oh God. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Gavesta here. This is the normal tank guide for Siegecrafter Blackfuse. As always, you can click for the full raid guide or any other role-specific guides that you'd like to see. Now, before we get into the tank specifics, let's just briefly mention the overall mechanics so you kind of know what's going on. The main mechanic here is the assembly line, which you see in the background there. As a tank, you'll never be involved with this directly. So the only thing you need to know is that killing one weapon part on the assembly line each time means that the boss never gains a protective shield, and therefore you do more DPS to him. Other than that, when a weapon forms, it will spawn on the other side, so in the background on this side here, on the south, and it will attack the raid in some way. And this is just standard stuff. As a tank, you'll just avoid these attacks for the most part while doing your normal job. So, the truth of the matter is that tanks have the most important job of anybody in the raid for this fight. If tanks do not handle their roles properly, you just will not be successful. There's really no way around it. The good news is that this means tanks have a lot to do rather than just simply swapping on the boss every couple debuff stacks like normal. So the main mechanic here is that the Siegecrafter will use a debuff on the current tank pretty frequently called Electrostatic Charge. This is your main tank swap sort of debuff mechanic. However, in this case, it does extremely heavy damage and it stacks up. So each stack increases the damage of this ability by 100% per stack. So it goes up very rapidly. Therefore, it's a good idea for a tank to use a personal cooldown of some kind every time it hits after the second or third stack from that point forward. However, in addition to increasing the damage taken, this also gives you a damage boost to the targets with reactive armor, which is essentially the automated shredder. So each stack of electrostatic charge increases your damage to the shredder by 200% per stack. Now, reactive armor on the shredder itself means that any other DPS sources that don't have the tank debuff only do 20% of normal damage. So for the most part, other DPS cannot and should not really help attack the shredder. Killing the shredder is exclusively up to the tanks with that electrostatic charge debuff. So the overall process is the initial tank picks up Siegecrafter, holds him until they reach a comfortable level of electrostatic charges or the shredder spawns, whichever comes first. So I think we did 3 or 4 stacks and then the shredder popped and then we would swap. So now the tank that's not on Siegecrafter anymore has some electrostatic stacks and he picks up the new shredder ad. This shredder needs to be tanked at least 35 yards away from the boss, otherwise the boss will heal the shredder pretty rapidly. So, once the shredder is far enough away, the tank on the shredder should also try to hold the shredder inside an environmental effect on the ground. In this case, this fight has things like the spinning blades or the fire that you see on the ground. All that stuff actually damages the shredder in addition to damaging players. So what that means is that in addition to the huge percent increase of damage that the tank will do to the shredder itself can also take damage from the environment to help kill it faster. So the best thing we found that worked really well was to try to tank the shredder inside the saw blades that the boss will throw at random players. If possible, you can even tank it so it's standing in 2 saw blades or more at the same time. If there are no saw blades active, however, which usually means they've been sucked up by the magnet weapon, then instead the tank should just hold the shredder inside the fire patch instead. That's the second best damaging ability that you can do. So, again, if you're on the shredder, just hold it in a saw blade or multiple if you can without being in the saw blade yourself. Do as much DPS as possible, of course, to kill it as soon as you can. If there's no saw blades, then instead use the fire patches. Once again, making sure you're not standing in them, but the shredder is doing so. Once the shredder dies, you just go back to the boss and be ready to taunt off the current tank once the new shredder spawns, and this just repeats over and over. Pretty simple. Now, the last thing to be aware of as a tank is that the shredders will sometimes leap into the air and use death from above. Death from above basically does a smash on the ground when they land within 15 yards that does pretty heavy damage, and it will stun the shredder for 5 seconds. During the stun period, there you can see it landing, it takes 200% extra damage for 5 seconds. So once it's landed, you can rush back in just outside of the slam range and do a lot of burst DPS to it, essentially. And this is why using the saw blade is really good, because as soon as it comes back down, it's going to take 200% extra damage for those few seconds while it's getting hit by the saw blade as well. The final thing for the shredders is that they cast Overload, which is the main damaging source for your raid members. This does 200,000 damage every time it hits, but it increases by 30% per stack. So this is the key reason that your tanks need to be quick to kill the shredders when it's their job to do so. So if you don't kill the shredder quickly enough, this overload damage quickly goes out of control and things get a little dicey. So you may need to have your raid use raid cooldowns if the overload stacks are getting too high and the shredder is not close to death. So that's it, really. As I said, the tank role is the most important one on this fight. So handling the shredders and the swap mechanics, getting them in the right spot, and killing them quickly will pretty much lead to your success after a few practice attempts. That is the normal tank guide for Siegecrafter Blackfuse. As always, good luck, and thanks for watching.